Mr Mayor, can I ask that all votes be recorded tonight, please? And I think I've got a seconder for that. Okay, everybody stand. Everybody stands. Okay. Mr Mayor, the reason that I've asked for all the votes to be recorded is to comply with government guidance and to protect councillors from inadvertently placing the council at risk. I make council aware of Charity Commission Guidance OG 56 Part B1 paragraph 4.2, which says position of individuals acting on behalf of a local authority. Whatever the structure employed, the individuals concerned are not themselves charity trustees. They must, however, act in a responsible way so as to ensure that the local authority acts properly as a charity trustee. If they fail to do this, they may be liable to the council under local government law for any losses it bears as a charity trustee. OG 56B1 para 6 states, in principle, a corporate trustee, such as a local authority, is liable for breach of trust in the same way as an individual trustee. It can be sued for breach of trust, and if liable, will have to compensate the trust out of its corporate assets. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
It was nice to see that all the mayors of the Fylde were there. That was the mayors of Fylde, Wyre and Blackpool, and that we were all women, so women power. Right? So that was nice to see. Again, thank you to those who are coming to support the Mayor's Charities and attending the Mayor's Ball. And again, thank you to those who have made contributions in other ways. A reminder that on April the 1st, another fundraiser is being held, and that's a flower demonstration by Sheila Radcliffe here at the Town Hall. Just a reminder about the coronavirus, I hope everybody stays well, and we'll search you on the way out for toilet rolls that might be trying to be smuggled out, all right, just in case there's a bit of a shortage. Right, thank you. That was the end of my announcements. Chief Executive, have you got any communications to report?
None this evening, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Right. Item agenda. Item 4 on the agenda is the Lytham Institute. So I invite Councillor Karen Butley to present this item.
Motion, please, Mr Mayor.
Sorry, what was the
Procedural motion.
a procedural motion? Yeah. Do you vote that? Right, Councillor Gill, yes, what is your procedural motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the Constitution allows for procedural motions to change the order of business in the agenda. I refer to Part 4, paragraph 11.2, Section 3. The reason for this request is that a number of councillors called for this special meeting, with Councillor Lloyd submitting a paper to be taken as the agenda. Subsequent to this, an agenda item to the F&D, that's the Finance and Democracy, was referred to this special meeting. The order should reflect the course of events. Having read the Finance and Democracy paper, it would seem inappropriate to discuss this agenda item without first establishing elements raised by Councillor Lloyd in the paper he originally submitted, as they provide the Council with the background necessary to allow good decision making. To do this would also show that the Council is operating to the Charity Commission's guidelines around openness and transparency. I have asked Council officers why the agenda items are this way round and have been informed by email from the Chief Executive that the decision has come from advice given by the Charity Commission. When you read the Charities Act, the guidance and the email that was sent to the Chief Executive, none of these define the running order of the agenda. They merely define the process that needs to be followed to change the objective of the Trust and to then enter consultation for an amended scheme. The only conclusion one can come to is that the proposals are being submitted to Council without allowing members to be fully aware of the circumstances. The agenda order is purely down to you, Mr Mayor, as defined by the Council's constitution, to which the Trust is currently operating. I therefore move to change the order of business in the agenda for the proposed agenda items to be reversed. Thank you.
Councillor Gill.
Yes, and second.
Right, thank you.
Procedural motion.
Thank you. Right, thank you. Council procedure on Rule 10 allows any member to propose that the order of business to be varied. If such a proposition is made and seconded, it is put to the vote without discussion. So we will take on a vote on that. A recorded vote.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is votes for or against the order of business being varied as set out by Councillor Gill. Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Andrews.
Against.
Councillor Anthony.
Against.
Councillor Armitt. For. Councillor Blackshaw.
For.
Councillor Brearley. Councillor Brickles. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Clayton.
For.
Councillor Collins. Delmer Collins. Sorry, Councillor Delmer Collins.
Against.
Councillor Peter Collins.
For.
Councillor Dixon.
Against.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Against.
Councillor Fiddler.
Against.
Councillor Gaunt.
Against.
Councillor Gill.
For.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Griffiths.
For.
Councillor Hardy. Councillor Harris.
Against.
Councillor Harrison.
Against.
Councillor Hayhurst. Councillor Henshaw.
For.
Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Kirkham.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Little.
Against.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Morris. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Nash.
Against.
Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes.
For.
Councillor O'Rourke.
Against.
Councillor Rigby. Councillor Sayward.
Against.
Councillor Settle.
Against.
Councillor Silverwood.
For.
Councillor Singleton.
Against.
Councillor Small.
Against.
Councillor Speak. Councillor Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Threlfall.
Against.
Councillor Trudgill.
Against.
Councillor Wilder.
Against.
Councillor Withers.
Against.
The Mayor, Councillor Jakes.
Against.
And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. That's 12 for, Mr Mayor, and 30 against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I wish to be clear that when making decisions on Lytham Institute, we are doing so as corporate trustee. We are not doing so as a council, and we are not doing so as individual trustees of a charity. As such, the trustee cannot act simultaneously as a council nor vice versa. There has been much confusion over this, understandably so, and therefore it is worth making this distinction at the outset. This situation has come about following the registration of Lytham Institute as a charity and the need to move forward in that guise, something that opposition members are unfortunately stalling with their actions to date. Members of the public and the different groups that have an interest in Lytham Institute are naturally concerned with the use of the building to further the ends of the charitable trust, and this is where another confusion lies, because the purpose of this report is to start the consultation process which will set the parameters. In other words, it will update the charitable purposes of the trust, after which time any uses of the building can be considered. It is putting the cart before the horse to do otherwise. To refer to the report before you, the application to register the Institute as a charity was made in August last year, and the process completed in December. The next steps are to update the charitable objects and to introduce administrative procedures, and I will deal with these in turn. Firstly, on the charitable objects. At paragraph 10, the report explains why the charitable objects need to be changed. That can only be done by the Charity Commission, and in accordance with their guidance, it will be done after a consultation exercise. The proposed objects are set out in bold at paragraph 12. These are drafted based on the Charity Commission example for community centres. I need to stress that the decision is to consult on the proposed objects, not to decide upon them today. Turning to the administrative provisions which govern, for example, how trustees are added or removed or how meetings are run, are normally included in the governing document. In this case, however, the 1917 lease assignment does not include any governance arrangements, yet this is a requirement for a trust in 2020. Further guidance has been sought from the Charity Commission on the administrative provisions, and confirmation in writing has been provided that the corporate trustee has the power and should draft those provisions, which are referred to in paragraph 13 of the report. And the recommendations which are on the table in front of all members have been updated to reflect this guidance. Turning specifically to the updated recommendations, therefore, the first is to approve the proposed objects for consultation. The second is to take on board the Charity Commission guidance regarding the drafting of administrative provisions and instructs officers to do this for consideration by members. The third is to reset the dates for consultation, given that this report has been delayed by the calling of a special council meeting to 20th of April, which is a period of 6 weeks. The fourth is to address another confusion about the appropriate forum for decision-making on trust matters, and it is worth dwelling on this for a minute. The Charity Commission guidelines clearly state that where the local authority is the sole corporate trustee, decisions regarding the trust should be made in accordance with the existing decision-making procedures of the council. In this case, in Fylde, this is a committee system. Whilst the Institute currently has some users, there are no council services delivered from the premises, and the asset belongs to the trust and not the council. Therefore, it is, and indeed should be, surplus to the operational service requirements of the council. It is a trust asset held for the purposes of the trust. Finance and Democracy Committee is responsible for dealing with assets that are surplus to the requirements of the council. It is not appropriate to choose a committee for dealing with this matter because of the makeup of the members of that committee. To do so is yet again blurring the distinction between councillors, the council and the corporate trustee. Dealing with trust matters at Finance and Democracy Committee allows for greater flexibility to debate and make decisions, allows for presentations by officers and scrutiny of those presentations and questions, and a flexibility to call special meetings as necessary, which is a less cumbersome process than calling a special council meeting. This process, undertaken by members of the opposition, puts the matter into a debating chamber where grandstanding is more prevalent and inappropriate and misguided propositions are more likely to be put into the arena, an example of which is at agenda item 5. Mr Mayor, I move the amended recommendations and I have a seconder in Councillor Vince Settle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very pleased to second these recommendations in the form of the 4 resolutions. I've read all the documents, been in briefings with our legal officer, and I'm aware of various telephone conversations with Charity Commission officials. All this confirms my belief that we are following Charity Commission guidance 100%. So we can all now approve these recommendations. We can swiftly move on to the much-awaited consultation stage and keep this process moving along at pace. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In practice, it appears to have been the case that parts of the council have assumed the institute was only a library. And once that was relocated, the building was no longer needed. The other uses for which it was established, which remain set out in the trust instrument, currently the 1917 conveyance, appear to have been disregarded, as have the services within those categories that are currently being provided by existing users and hirers. It is therefore necessary to determine what steps the council will take to gather the evidence it needs to inform its decision taking regarding the Lytham Institute. I therefore propose the following amendment to replace the revised recommendations, and I would like to give notice of 3 further amendments. I've got copies here.
Mr Mayor, the amendment that Councillor Collins has handed up is as follows. That Fileborough Council notes, 1, councillors have been asked to take decisions without being provided with proper and sufficient information on which to base them. 2, no evidence has been provided to council to support, nor have council debated the claim made to Finance and Democracy Committee that the substantive interest in this property now falls within the definition of being surplus to the council's operational requirements. 3, council have not been presented with any documentary evidence to support the claim that the institute is not held for the purposes of meeting the cultural, recreational and social needs of people in Lytham and the surrounding area. 4, council have not received a professional officer report and evidence regarding the architectural and heritage importance of this Grade 2 listed building, nor have council received details of what may be required and achievable by way of repair, maintenance or improvement. 5, council have received no report from the Tourism and Leisure Committee concerning the value or otherwise of the Institute in respect of the leisure, community development, arts, culture and heritage facilities that are currently provided in and from the Institute. This is a fundamental omission when the committee's terms of reference include, quote, 3, considering reports, reviewing and formulating, where necessary, policies relating to leisure management and community development. 5, considering reports, reviewing and formulating, where necessary, policies relating to arts, culture and heritage. 10, to deal with issues arising in relation to the trust set up to manage Lowther Pavilion and Gardens. 13, to consider any management issues arising in relation to land or property within the remit of the committee. 14, to keep the Council's sports development programme under review. Those are, I think, quotes from the terms of reference of the Tourism and Leisure Committee. To return to Councillor Collins's amendment text, 6, Council have received no report regarding the currently unmet social, cultural, recreational and community development needs of people in Lytham and surrounding areas that the Trust is established to cater for. 7, no data has been provided to the Council on the use of the building over time, nor whether any of those uses are declining or growing. And so, before any further decisions are taken, the amendment continues, there is a need to produce the evidence that councillors need to properly inform their decisions on such matters, and therefore this council requests 1, that the Planning Committee reports to a future council meeting on the importance of the architectural and heritage value of the Institute building and its current importance and relationship to Lytham Town Centre. 2, that the Tourism and Leisure Committee be asked to gather evidence detailing the existing services and facilities provided within the Institute, including their extent and their community value and importance. 3, that the Tourism and Leisure Committee commission a survey of unmet social, recreational and cultural need in Lytham and surrounding areas. 4, that the Tourism and Leisure Committee invite the views and observations of relevant local and national bodies about need and availability that is and could be provided in the Institute, with the selection of those relevant bodies being guided by the expressed public desires in the possible future uses report published by the Friends of Lytham Institute. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Anybody wishes
I believe I've got a seconder for the amendment.
Thank you. Who is your Smith?
I'd like to second it.
Anybody wish to speak to this amendment?
Well, yeah.
Councillor Butley, do you wish to sum up?
Hang on.
Oh, raise your hand, then we can see.
I did raise my hand.
Sorry,
actually,
we
but
can see
never
that.
mind. Yeah, I'd like to support Councillor Collins' amendment. The Lytham Institute has been at the heart of the community for nearly 150 years. Farnborough Council has recently registered the Institute as a new charity. A number of questions have been raised by Councillor Collins, such as at which meeting of the Council was a decision made that the Institute was surplus to the Council's operational requirements. Where is the report about the importance of the architectural and heritage value of the building? What is the importance of the present cultural, recreation and social services provided in the building? Does anyone here tonight know the extent and scope of the information held in the Heritage Group's archives, which are housed in this building? Does anyone here tonight know what the range of educational and social activities are in the building and how well attended these activities are? What views have been sought from local and national bodies concerning cultural, social and recreational needs in Lytham, such as the local CCG, Sports England, Lancashire County Council, Social Services, the churches, etc.? And are these increasing or declining? A lot of questions, and there are many more. Full and detailed research is needed to fulfil the Institute's future role as a charity, so that councillors can make their individual decisions based on knowledge and insight. So how do you value a community centre? And that's what the Institute has been for nearly 150 years. Is it in pounds, shillings and pence? Or is it something much more, such as the health and well-being of the community? I would urge members to support Councillor Collins' amendments that calls for a close cooperation with all the various committees to collate a detailed and knowledgeable platform of evidence that councillors can then make their valued judgments upon. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to commend Councillor Collins on trying to bring item 5 forward, second attempt tonight. Well done.
Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Dixon.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just like to raise issue with part of that amendment, as long as it was, suggested that we shouldn't be discussing, because it's not been debated yet at Finance and Democracy. Well, that's why this meeting was called, because the independent councillors didn't want to discuss it at Finance and Democracy and called this meeting before the agenda for that meeting was made. It's pointless.
Yes. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Personally, I don't see the need for the amendment at all. And I think that the proposed use of one of the Charity Commission's model objectives, which is for a community centre, would not prevent any of the uses that people are concerned about or have talked about. And I think to start, also, I think we have to remember the point that the Deputy Leader, Councillor Buckley, made, that we cannot blur the distinction between the council and the corporate trustee. So for us to talk about various committees going off commissioning reports, that's for the trust to do, and therefore the council as the corporate trustee, not for us to decide as the council. And I think there's an important distinction there. But anyway, thank you very much.
Have we got any more speakers? Councillor, do you wish to speak sum up?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I can't support the amendment as it is part 1 of item 5. I think we now know what the next 3 amendments are all going to be. I urge Council to stick with the original resolutions on the desk and not to preempt any future use of this building, which I think the proposition before you is trying to do, but to do things in a proper way as guided by the Charity Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the votes are for or against Councillor Collins' amendment. Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Andrews.
Against.
Councillor Anthony.
Against.
Councillor Armitt.
For.
Councillor Blackshaw.
For.
Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Clayton.
For.
Councillor Delma Collins.
Against.
Councillor Peter Collins.
For.
Councillor Dixon.
Against.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Against.
Councillor Fiddler.
Against.
Councillor Gaunt.
Against.
Councillor Gill.
For.
Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw.
For.
Councillor Kirkham.
Against.
Councillor Lee.
For.
Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Nash.
Against.
Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke.
Against.
Councillor Rigby. Councillor Sayward. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton.
Against.
Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers.
Against.
The Mayor, Councillor Jakes.
Against.
And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. That was 12 for the amendment, Mr Mayor, and 30 against the amendment.
Councillor Collins.
Second amendment, Mr Mayor. Council is aware that altering the original purposes of a trust is a complex and important matter, Ultimately, as the sole trustee, it requires exercise of the council's judgment to fashion proposals on which it will consult. In order for the council's judgment to be well informed, those taking the decision need to be fully appraised of the need for alteration and of the options and alternatives that may be available. I propose the amendment. I don't know if Mr Curtis wants to read it out.
Yes. Yes, Mr Mayor, the amendment is that Council, I think you've read the preamble out, haven't you, Councillor Collins?
Yeah.
Yes, that Council requests that officers report to a future meeting of the Tourism and Leisure Committee setting out A, the original and current requirements of the trust instrument, B, details of the reasons that change is now required and whether such changes are mandatory or discretionary, C, any criteria and constraints governing the changes that might be made, D, what officers consider to be the closest possible modern equivalents to the original trust instrument, in order that the Council may be satisfied that it is necessary to alter the present purposes of the trust, Mr Mayor.
Have you got a seconder, Mr?
Yes, I'd like to second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor, did you wish to?
I believe that we should take time and pay a great deal of attention when setting up a trust for Lytham Institute. There's no reason to rush things, as far as I'm aware. I believe that we've not even separated the accounts in any way at the moment, or maybe we have by now. If not, can I ask when this will be done? The only experience the council has of setting up a trust is the one at Lowther. And personally, I would hate to replicate that, because from what I can gather, we appear to have a situation where we have one trustee on that trust. We're paying out huge sums in grant monies, we appear to pick up bills for maintenance, and some of our officers are paid by us to work for the trust. And I'm advised that in the past, the council has been criticised by the trustees. Then, when as a result of their decision making, they need access to professional advice, they come running to us, expecting us to pick up the bill, threatening to resign from the trust if we don't agree to bail them out, which, if the threat had been carried out, would have left the council as the sole trustee and left to pick up the pieces. Please, colleagues, let us learn from this. With this in mind, I think we should use our experience to make sure that we get a better agreement in place for the Institute, this council, our residents and also the people of Lytham. I've always believed that Lytham should have its own town council. It's the only area of the borough not parished. And if there was a town council, we could hand this building to that body to make sure that the building is retained for the people of Lytham. In the absence of a town council, we need to set up a trust which will protect the building and its use to ensure that it's not sold off and the money is used to prop up other buildings in Lytham. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Are there any more speakers?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, you may wonder why I'm standing here and what has Lytham Institute got to do with me. Well, we ought to make it a little bit personal here, because I moved to Lytham when I was 19 and I lived in Diggs on Westby Street, and I spent many an hour on the snooker tables, and actually Councillor Tim Ashton never actually got onto table 1, he was always on table 3. And latterly, in recent years, my youngest daughter has attended the Bounce and Rhyme where the library was, when the library was actually housed there. We're trying to save the Institute for the future use of Lytham residents, in the same way that I benefited from it and its existence in the past. Every town needs a community focus. Lytham has a community focus in the Institute. This building, with its history, heritage and position, should continue to be used in this way. This was the intention of the gift from the original owners. It's the duty of the council to ensure that this legacy endures and the status of the Institute does not remain, as it is currently the case, being left to languish and deteriorate. It is imperative that the people of Lytham are consulted over its future use, and with that, the correct partner, it can thrive and flourish. To make this happen, it is not necessary to alter the objectives of the Trust. Instead, a functioning document is required to allow the Institute to be managed correctly. Hence the need for consultation over the scheme, not the objectives. In essence, my aim is not far removed from the aim of the Council officers. However, there are two distinct differences. I want to ensure that the Trust does not lose the spirit of maintaining the facility for the public, and the public have the leading right to have their say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Buckley, would you like some?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity. I first of all want to correct any assumption that the accounts have not been separated, because the accounts have indeed been separated. So I'm very happy to clarify that. If members read the F&D report and they read the new resolutions, they would see that all of the matters just been raised are dealt with adequately in that report and also in the new resolution. Certainly it is recognised that there does need to be administrative provisions. That is dealt with in Resolution 2, to instruct officers to draft those, to be considered by members prior to consultation. So certainly there can be no suggestion that that will not happen. As before, Mr Mayor, the proposal before you is simply to follow the guidance and not to put the cart before the horse. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is for or against Councillor Collins' second amendment, and we'll start with Councillor Aitken.
Against.
Councillor Andrews.
Against.
Councillor Anthony.
Against.
Councillor Armitt.
For.
Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley.
Against.
Councillor Fiddler.
Against.
Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. It was indeed 12 for and 30 against.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move my third amendment. I'm grateful to Mr Curtis for reading it out.
You have a seconder?
Yes, I'd like to second that, Mr Mayor.
So the amendment of Councillor Collins is as follows: that the Fylde Borough Council notes 1. If the Council determines that a change needs to be made to the Trust's purpose/objectives, Council will need to consider the range of options available to it in respect of changed purposes/objectives that lie within the criteria set by the Charity Commission. To make properly informed decisions about future purposes/objectives for the Trust, the Council needs to be appraised of the options available, together with a commentary for each option, setting out the extent to which it accords with the Charity Commission criteria. Furthermore, to secure the support of the Trust's beneficiaries, it is important to ensure that they are invited to input into the decision-taking process in this matter at an early stage. 2. The position of a council as a charity's sole trustee is not always ideal, not least because, as the Charity Commission sets out in its guidance, quote, local authorities often fail to appreciate that they are not free to deal with the property of a charity in the same way as they can deal with their corporate property held for statutory purposes. The Commission also say, quote, when making a scheme for some other purpose in relation to a charity which is administered by a local authority as trustee, we will consider whether other trusteeship arrangements might not be more appropriate. For example, we may suggest to the local authority that it retires in favour of a body of individual trustees, while perhaps retaining the right to appoint some of those trustees. End of quote. The Council needs to secure arrangements that can deliver its influence, whilst at the same time engaging and encouraging users and beneficiaries of the Trust to be proactive in its governance and support. One option amongst the several alternatives to meet this need and deliver a broad spectrum of governance perspectives would be to consider representation by, say, thirds, where 1/3 of the trustees will be nominated by the Council, 1/3 nominated by users of the Institute, and 1/3 nominated by beneficiaries of the Trust. In order to reach a decision on what form of governance it should seek for the future, Council needs to be advised of the range of possible governance options that exist and the potential advantages and disadvantages of each. And Council requires that the officer's revised recommendation be removed and replaced by 1. In respect of changed purposes/objects for the Institute, the Tourism and Leisure Committee receive a report setting out the range of options that exist as being close alternative purposes/objects, together with a commentary on each option, setting out the extent to which each meets the Charity Commission's requirements to A. Accord with the spirit of the gift, B. Deliver new purposes that are close to the original, and C. To be suitable and effective in the light of current social and economic circumstances. 2. The Tourism and Leisure Committee publish a consultation report on these options, together with its preliminary view on this matter, and invites comment from existing Institute users, interested local commentary groups, and the beneficiaries of the charity, prior to considering the representations it has received, and amending its preliminary view as needed, in order to make a recommendation of its final view to Council. And finally, 3, that in respect of future governance arrangements, the Council will receive a report setting out the range of alternative governance options the Trust could request, together with a commentary on the advantages and disadvantages of each option, in order to come to a preliminary view for consultation purposes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Does anybody wish to speak on this amendment?
I believe we've got a seconder for this.
I'd like to second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Speakers? No? Karen, would you like, sorry, Councillor Butley, would you like to sum up?
I'm slowly losing the will to live, Mr. Mayor. and becoming more and more convinced that certain individuals are more intent on tying the Trust up in knots rather than to put matters out properly to consultation, deal with the objects of the charity that quite clearly need to be updated, and put together a proper scheme for its governance. If we were to follow all of this, Mr. Mayor, we'd still be debating it a year from now. I can't accept the amendment.
Thank you. We'll go to the vote.
Starting with, this is Councillor Collins' amendment, starting with Councillor Aitken.
Yeah.
Councillor Andrews. Councillor Anthony.
Against.
Councillor Armitt. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green.
Against.
Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. Madam Mayor, Mr Mayor, counting as I went along, I made that 12 in favour of the amendment and 30 against.
Wow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to propose my fourth amendment to replace the officer's revised recommendations, and grateful to Mr Curtis. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, the fourth amendment from Councillor Collins, subject to being seconded by somebody, by Councillor Lloyd, is that Fyleborough Council notes, 1, the Council has accepted its responsibility to comply with Charity Commission guidance to consult at various stages in the process of refreshing the purpose and governance arrangements of the Trust. 2, it has also noted the Commission has stressed that because of the local interest in the charity and the use of the Institute, there needs to be a suitable consultation before proceeding with the scheme application. 3, that consultation needs to seek the views of those who would be affected by or might have an interest in the changes proposed. 4, Council will separately need to come to a preliminary view on its preferred changes to the Trust's governance arrangements. 5, Council should then publish and consult upon its preferred purposes and governance arrangements with existing Institute users, interested local community groups and the beneficiaries of the charity, and that having arrived at its preferred view on the Trust's future purpose and governance, the Council will debate and determine an appropriate form of consultation that will meet the Charity Commission's requirements and secure the widest support from local users, community groups and beneficiaries. And that was moved by Councillor Collins and seconded by Councillor Lloyd, Mr Mayor.
Anybody who wishes to speak on this? No? Yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We as councillors must follow the Charity Commission's guidelines. The Friends of Lytham Institute, set up nearly 5 years ago, have been assisting in this process. The Friends have had numerous public meetings. Indeed, they have recently gathered public opinion in a future users report, which I believe many of you have now seen. This is an exciting time for the Institute in many ways, paving a way to a new reborn community centre that will emerge from this period of consultation. We as councillors must follow the Charity Commission's guidelines, as spelled out by Councillor Collins, and consult with a whole raft of interested parties before gathering the evidence to proceed with a new scheme, as the Charity Commission indicates. So I would ask you all, fellow councillors, to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anybody who wishes to speak?
I'd just like to say, Mr Mayor, that we as councillors on this side of the chamber are following the Charity Commission guidelines. I don't know what they're doing over there, but simply to say that all of that's been said in here is dealt with quite adequately by the F&D report, and if it had only reached committee, all these questions, these angst, these concerns could have been rehearsed in that environment with officer representation and a proper scrutiny. And by bringing it to special council, the opposition members have deprived this council from doing that.
So the vote on Councillor Collins' fourth amendment, Mr Mayor, starting with Councillor Aitken. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Anthony. Councillor Armitt. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. Mr Mayor, that's 12 votes for the amendment and 30 against the amendment.
Anybody else who wishes to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have 3 amendments that I would like to propose against the resolutions 1 to 4, please. I have a copy.
What, will I give them the wrong piece of paper? Mr Mayor, the amendment from Councillor Gill. The amendment from Councillor Gill is in 3 parts, as I understand it. The first is an amendment to resolution, or proposed resolution number 1, that recommendation be removed. The second is an alternate to resolution 1. Am I correct in taking these together?
Yes.
An alternate to resolution 1, which is to remove the words "or other appropriate premises," as we're only considering Lytham Institute, not, for example, the Town Hall. And the third part is an amendment to resolution 3, that the order be changed in paragraph 15 for item D to replace item A, and the wording changed from online representation to elected members in their respected wards to facilitate workshops or surgeries using a standard information pack agreed by council with a minimum of 100 responses. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry, I'll speak first on the first amendment, please. Thank you. I do appreciate that what I'm going to be saying is a reasonable amount of complex legal terminology in my proposal. The The reason for that is that I actually want to get this thing moving forward, and irrespective of what Councillor Buckley has said, I actually want to make sure that the Institute is there for the people and we do it in the right way. Good, thank you. I'd like to see you vote for it then, please. But as a challenge is about legal position, I hope you make it clear for you to understand. And I do hope tonight, on such a critical issue to the people of the Fylde, that everyone is allowed a free vote on their own beliefs and not a mass party vote for potentially all the wrong reasons. We want to ensure the Trust's objectives remain in place to prevent the sale or dispersal of the Trust away from the Council's control and the people's ownership. In the officer's report, paragraph 10 is quite misleading and incorrect. It infers that because the Acts, and I think I've handed my bit to you, have been repealed, then this is a valid reason for changing the objective. It infers that the running of libraries not being a council function is also a reason for changing the objective. The first issue about the Acts quoted being repealed being a valid reason for changing the objective is misleading. The current Trust's objectives clearly cover the case when legislation changes. The words quoted in the 1917 assignment says, any acts reenacted or amended and said acts or any of them. So most of the objectives should be changed to update the relevant acts, but even this is not necessary as the current objective is still valid. Now let us look at the second issue where it refers to the council running libraries. It's actually irrelevant. We are discussing the Trust, not the local authority makeup of functions. The Trust could be to do basket weaving. I'm not, to my knowledge, know that the council actually has one of those functions to do basket weaving. So the reason should be discounted. With regard to the library function, the Institute already has an archive library. It's in operation by the Heritage Group. The definition of a library, just for those, is that it's a curated collection of sources of information made accessible to a defined community for reference or borrowing. A library is organised for use and maintained by a public body, an institution, a corporation or a private individual. The Heritage Collection satisfies both these points. I've been advised by officers that correspondence from the Charity Commission suggests that if the charity no longer provides a library, his objectives need to be changed. Again, the Institute has a library, so this advice is irrelevant. In fact, the Trust objectives cover more than the library aspect. They cover, and I quote from the recent legal opinion, which this council took into for allocating it as a trust, established to provide instruction and mental improvement for all classes, without sectarian or party politics, where they can meet for reading, conversation and general social intercourse. I therefore propose that the first part of the objectives be removed. Thank you.
Councillor. Sum up. When you're going to that.
Mr Mayor, this is an example of falling into the trap of trying to decide on objects now rather than setting them out, sending them out for consultation and having those responses and then considering each and every one of those responses. So for that reason, I would urge members to stick with the original proposition.
Right, we'll go to the vote now.
So it's the vote on Councillor Gill's composite amendment, which was read out, and starting with for or against that amendment, starting with Councillor Aitken. Councillor Andrews. Against. Councillor Anthony. Against. Councillor Armitt.
For.
Councillor Blackshaw.
For.
Councillor Buckley.
Against.
Councillor Clayton.
For.
Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Peter Collins.
For.
Councillor Dixon.
Against.
Councillor Fazakerley.
Against.
Councillor Fiddler.
Against.
Councillor Gaunt.
Against.
Councillor Gill.
4.
Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Sayward. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. Mr Mayor, there were 12 for the amendment and there were 30 against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm sure you're getting a bit fed up with this now. This is a simple amendment, and recognising that, unfortunately, people tend not to be voting for the benefits, but there we go. This is a very simple amendment where, with regard to the proposal that is in front of us to change the objectives, I'm suggesting that there is no need for any other premises to be included. We are talking about Lytham Institute here. The second paragraph actually refers to the maintenance of other appropriate premises. I don't believe we're looking at this trust looking after the assembly rooms, the town hall, or any other premises. So I would recommend to go along with this to remove or other appropriate premises within that thing. I so move my amendment.
We got a second, yes? Councillor Blackshaw. Okay. Right. Anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment? Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it's one building at the moment, but the trust may move on. Why limit it now and have to go back and change things further down the line? One day the trust may be more than just one building. So I don't see a problem in leaving it as it is.
Anybody else who wishes to speak? Thank you. Sorry, Karen. Thank you.
So that's, sorry, Mr Mayor, that's for or against Councillor Gill's second amendment, starting with Councillor Aitken. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Anthony. Councillor Armitt. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delmer Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Sayward. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. Mr Mayor, there were 12 votes for the amendment and 30 votes against.
Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Come to my third amendment, and this is associated with the Resolution 3 and referring to paragraph 15 within the report. Paragraph 15 would appear to be at variance to a proposal in an email from the Chief Executive to the Friends of the Institute group, which is dated later. The 1917 assignment clearly leaves the Institute upon trust to maintain the said premises and buildings now and hereafter erected thereon for public use. This should therefore be the thrust of the consultation for the make-up of the scheme and to ensure that the public are involved in consultation and major decisions affecting the Institute with a minimum of responses required for the period of consultation. To ask for online representation would just not work with the public. It doesn't work. Just have to look at the customer survey from the council. 407 people responded out of 78,000. Online representation just does not work. You need to address the people. So I fully agree and concur with the Chief Executive's proposal that we actually engage with the people in the wards by the councillors. I therefore propose that the order of recommendation, Resolution 3, be changed in paragraph 15 such that the public come first, i.e. D becomes A, and the wording in the Chief Executive's email replaces the online representation to facilitate workshops and surgeries. Thank you.
Councillor Blackshaw. Okay. Right, is there anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment? No. Councillor Buckley, would you like to Sorry? Okay. Right. Thank you. We'll go to the vote then.
So, Mr Mayor, the vote is for or against Councillor Gill's third amendment, starting with Councillor Aitken. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Anthony. Councillor Armitt. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delma Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. Mr Mayor, that's 12 votes for the amendment and 30 votes against the amendment.
Back to the substantive motion then, and are there any speakers? Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to say, I think tonight we've really risked losing a layer of scrutiny and transparency involved in the committee system here at Fylde, which many of the people in this room fought for to bring back. By having this at full council, at committee we've got officers and expert input to guide us as councillors. At committee, councillors can speak on matters time and time again, not just once. I've yet to see a request to speak at committee ever denied. At committee, the public can attend. Why were we having it at Finance and Democracy? Because it involves a new governance model in the form of a trust. It's about placing a council asset in a trust. And F&D has remit over community projects, strategic partnerships and policy development, which are all relevant here. After committee, the decision is brought to, you guessed it, full council here, where councillors can further raise any issues, where members of the public can again attend. By bringing this to this meeting alone, we've taken a layer of debate out of this situation and a layer of expertise from officers, which, we can really do with. There's been scaremongering about the Institute on a dreadful scale. There's councillors with more than a little help from mischievous sources raising, and I think it was Councillor Gill mentioned before, the sale of the Institute. I have not heard in my 2 years on this council any proposals to sell the Institute. And I thank my colleague over to the left, who's been on this council, is it 3 decades? The words sell an Institute have never been mentioned in the same conversation, ever. Ever. Or dispose. Never been discussed. It's shocking. Everyone here is aware there's a full consultation in the pipeline which will involve every single council who wishes to take part, as well as interested community groups. Let's get it moving. Let's find out what we can do with that asset and let's get it working in Lytham. I was, until very recently, a part of one of those groups, and I worked alongside the original Friends group, helping put together a series of business plans following extensive public consultation to demonstrate how a modern institute could work. I want to see a community facility in the Institute in Lytham. I want nothing more than for it to be a success, to be a draw for the town and surrounding businesses, and to help the town as a whole. Whether that's a community space supported by education, creative arts, or some commercial space, I don't mind, so long as we get a revamped institute that works for the town. But I've had to step back from that because I was constantly and consistently told about me being a Conservative and our plans and discussions to sell it off, which simply have never happened. I've just never ever heard within this council any disposal or sale talk. I also didn't like the vitriol on social media and clearly politically motivated untruths that were being bandied about, which led to approaches in the street from people quoting back to me things I haven't actually said. If only all that effort had been put into drawing up decent proposals for what could be a great community centre in Lytham. For me, it's very simple. We need that institute back open and serving the community, not used as a political football, as it has been tonight, to help certain independent councillors score points in a battle which simply does not exist. Perhaps it helps those councillors disguise the embarrassing fact they've never been interested in the institute in the past.
Yes, thank you, Roger Small.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm standing to support the original recommendations. I'm sad tonight that we've had so much woolly thinking that all it would do would cause further delay, dressing it up as progress, when all it would do would mire it in long-winded discussions. And I do want to reiterate, for all concerned, I've never heard anything about selling the Institute, disposing of the Institute. In fact, people on this side want to see what's best for it. And, we've been hearing these accusations all over tonight, which is frankly ridiculous. We want to see what is best for the Institute, for the people in Lytham. The resolutions, the original ones that you've seen tonight, are the most common sense ones that we've heard. By adopting them, we move the issue forward, not further delaying it. By not adopting them, all we would do would stall the process further. And I'm not sure if it is some people's deliberate intent to do this. I find it hard to believe that people do act that way. But some of the things I've heard tonight, frankly, beggars belief. So I would ask all members, no matter what grouping they're involved with, support these recommendations, these resolutions tonight, so that we can move it forward, so that the Institute has a successful future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is Is there anybody else who wishes to?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What is the big rush? There seems to be a big rush to not go through a full process on this. An example of that is, we've had the question tonight, who decided that the Institute was surplus to operational requirements? Then we had Councillor Small saying we want a future for the Institute. Who made that decision? No, we don't know. People might think that this is mischief making. It is not. I think the mischief making was getting this item, the referred item, before Councillor Lloyd's item on the agenda. What is needed is a full consultation on this. What we've proposed tonight has been rejected out of hand by the Conservative group. I've never said anything about the Institute being sold. All I've been interested in is following the correct process to arrive at the correct decision in the end, not a mad rush to get where you've already decided you want to go. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to correct Councillor Dixon, he said that there's never been any idea about selling the building. As early as 25th of July 2012, in a letter by Gary Sams to Lancashire County Council, he states, "We need to consider alternative options for disposal in connection with the Institute." So it has been said before. So obviously he wasn't on the council then, and neither was I. And also, I can go on actually, if you like. The Chief Executive writes to Mel Openshaw stating that the Institute is surplus to service delivery requirements. There's been a definite move to sort of dispose of the building.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just, I think I've maybe missed something, and a bit weird because I've been a member of the Conservative Party for many, many, many years. When was Gary Sams part of the ruling group, which is what's being put on Facebook by independents, by Councillor Lloyd's ward colleague, that the ruling group have been bandying about selling. It's the first I've heard of it. To my knowledge, Gary was a member of staff on the council, not a member of the ruling group. So I'd appreciate these rumours stopping and items such as that being taken off Facebook by the independent councillors that are putting it there.
Wishes to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we've come to the crux of it just now. I think the political mischief making is clearly on the side of the opposition. I fully endorse what Councillor Green has just said and remind this council, I hope I don't have to, remind this council that members make decisions, officers advise and members make decisions. So it is quite clear that the scaremongering is coming from that side of the chamber and it needs to stop. Despite saying that they want to move matters on, this convoluted report at item 5, which has been repeated by the amendments, would actually work against moving matters on, which is the reason why members on this side will not support it, because members on this side do want to see a future for Lytham Institute in accordance with the guidance, and we do want to consult, and we do want to consult properly. And we don't want to preempt the outcome of that consultation. I think it's been insightful this evening that some members would like to dispense with the officers of the council for their advice, with lawyers, or trust lawyers for their advice, and think that they are all matters to all men. It's also interesting to me tonight to hear from the Leader of the Opposition when she cites Lowther Institute and draws a parallel with Lowther Institute and the Lowther Pavilion, and the trust there, that she clearly speaks against financial support for that. And I can only draw from that that the opposition leader will not support any financial support for Lytham Institute either. So I'm glad, Mr Mayor, that we've come to the end of these amendments, and I urge matters to go back to the original resolutions, to move matters on, which we all want to do, and to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to the vote.
So, Mr Mayor, this is a vote on the 4 resolutions which are on members' desks in front of them. And we start with Councillor Aitken. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Anthony. Councillor Armitt. Councillor Blackshaw. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delmer Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Nash. Councillor Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Silverwood. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Small. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. Councillor Wilder. Councillor Withers. The Mayor, Councillor Jakes. And the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Redcliffe. I make that, Mr Mayor, 34 votes for and 8 abstentions.
Agenda item 5.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to move the propositions on item 5.
Have you got a seconder?
It's just a point of order, Mr Mayor. If there's no amendments to the item, the motions will be similar to ones previously rejected tonight. So I'd like advice from Mr Curtis on that point.
Mr Mayor, I think that I think that the standing order that Councillor Collins has in mind is 13.2, which is motion similar to one previously rejected. That says a motion or amendment in similar terms to one that's been rejected at a meeting of the Council in the last 6 months other than certain ones which don't apply here, can only be moved following a notice of motion signed by at least 8 members. Once the motion or amendment is dealt with, no one can propose a similar motion or amendment for 6 months. So, Madam Mayor, if you feel that the motions in the propositions in item 5 are in similar terms to those rejected as part of the consideration of the various amendments, then you can rule that the motions, that those propositions cannot be moved under 13.2. Of course, it's a matter for you, Mr Mayor.
My recommendation is